Generally speaking, FromSoftware's games are synonymous with difficulty, and the tough but fair approach to combat has been applauded by gamers looking for a challenge worldwide. There's certainly a masochistic appeal to getting your ass kicked for not pushing the buttons real good, but that's really just one facet of a much larger design philosophy. These games have faith that players will actually figure out how they work. Elden Ring in particular makes the delightful assumption that maybe some players already know the basics of how to play a video game, and if they don't, well, they can go jump in a hole. I mean, they actually put a tutorial at the bottom of a large hole, and if you already know how blocking and rolling and FromSoft stuff works, you don't have to go down in the hole. You can just go outside and do Tarnished like you wanted to. If you're new here, however, get in the hole, you rookie. FromSoft's games have a lot of old school sensibilities, and Elden Ring's tutorial hole, yes, we're calling it that, in particular feels like the modern equivalent of an instruction manual. You know, those little paper books that used to come with games when games only came in boxes?
Octorock's tech takes levers too, but with your help our hero pulls through.
Well, they weren't always required reading, but they were there to explain the basics if you didn't know what you were doing in the first place. If you got really stuck in the actual game, you could always call Nintendo's 1-900 number and they would tell you how to get the ice beam or whatever, and then your dad would probably yell at you when the phone bill came. Even before Elden Ring's educational pit, Souls games have been pretty good at getting out of the way and letting players go learn from their own mistakes. In FromSoft's earlier action RPGs, the closest thing to a conventional tutorial is a bunch of informative messages scattered around like a passive-aggressive roommate's post-it notes, but you're not even forced to stop and read them. That might steepen the learning curve for some newcomers, but it also streamlines the experience for series veterans and seasoned gamers. In terms of video game tutorials, World 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. Is essentially perfect. You learn by doing. There's not a mandatory prologue that keeps you from getting into the action, you just hit the ground running, literally, and then jumping, and then so on and so forth. Most older games are like that, probably not in terms of quality, but they are just as quick to get to the point. To their credit, older games were simple enough mechanically and narratively that it was assumed that players would just kind of figure it out on their own. Fast forward a few decades and most big games take at least an hour to get going. That's tolerable the first time around, but it makes a real chore out of return visits, and in the case of open world games, it's just infuriating.
Sounds like quite the party.
The vast majority of open world games start out in fairly closed introductory tunnels before they actually open up properly, which seems a little bit antithetical to the whole fundamental appeal of giving players lots of freedom. Before they let players climb virtually everything and harness new laws of physics, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom had their respective training grounds. I'll give the former a pass since it was such a huge flying leap departure for the series, but Tears, for everything it does right, feels like kind of a step backwards. It literally opens with you walking through tunnels to get to a cutscene that plays before it takes you to a big tutorial area in the sky, where you've got to do a bunch of tutorial stuff before you can finally dive headfirst into a world that you're probably somewhat familiar with and eager to get back to. It's a lot more succinct than Twilight Princess, but that's not saying much. Two of the best open world games of all time have had multiple chances to let returning players bypass their tedious tutorial zones. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim and Grand Theft Auto V have each gotten at least 2 re-releases each since their initial launch 2 console generations ago. Bethesda and Rockstar know full well how many copies of these games they sold, and they know they've got some repeat customers. But of all the bells, whistles, and other improvements that these newer versions boast, neither one has an official means of getting to the proverbial fireworks factory any sooner. Starting a new game in Skyrim still makes you take that insufferable wagon ride and do that whole prison break rigmarole, and GTA still has that North Yankton heist prologue. The Skyrim releases do offer mod support, and the modding community has graciously created ways of bypassing the introduction, but would it have killed Bethesda to implement an official, "This is my 3rd time buying this game, please, for the love of Molag Bal, let me start outside of Riverwood mode," instead of, I don't know, porting the game to Amazon Alexa as a goof?
Your shout echoes all the way to Sovngarde.
What happened?
Fusroda.
GTA's prologue is maybe even more frustrating, as it's a prerequisite for not just exploring Los Santos in single player, but also to get into GTA Online. Michael and Trevor's antics in North Yankton don't seem to have any significant connection to an MMO where you can take bong rips on a yacht while wearing a Zentai suit. It's even more baffling when you consider that GTA 5 introduced the extremely considerate and somehow divisive option of letting players skip missions if they die enough times and just want to progress the story to see what happens next. That's a feature that is bafflingly absent during the prologue itself. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a phenomenal game that deserves to be savored, but its long-winded prologue is at odds with both its free roam design and its cinematic influences. A mandatory sequence where the player has to physically make Arthur Morgan trudge through snow is immersive and pretty cool the first time around, but having to do it all over again is kind of a barrier to entry for anybody making a return visit to Rockstar's Wild West. Movies can be fast-forwarded, and they can also continue to play if you walk away during the boring parts that you've already seen before. Red Dead Redemption 2's prologue is a literal slog for anybody who just wants to go do some rootin' tootin' cowboy shootin'. If and when the long-rumored next-gen overhaul of Red Dead 2 releases, you can bet a few returning players will put the controller down after remembering that the game starts off how your parents describe getting to school, walking 5 miles in the snow, uphill both ways.
Come on!
Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is possibly my favorite video game ever, but its opening is comically tedious. Okay, correction, it was pretty cool the first time around. It's a little bit less cool when you have to replay it all over again as one of the final missions for the game, because reasons, spoilers, replaying it a third time because you wanted to start a new playthrough is a phantom pain in the ass. I would never dare question Hideo Kojima's artistic vision, but it's a bit of a head scratcher why an incredible open world game with some of the best on-foot movement ever to grace a video game opens with you literally dragging Snake's half-comatose carcass down a bunch of hospital corridors. Again, what's compelling cinematically doesn't necessarily have the same appeal when it's interactive. Cyberpunk 2077 is yet another phenomenal game set in a massive open world that is also front-loaded with 10 hours of setup and exposition and tutorial-type stuff. In spite of all the branching narrative, player choice, and systems that lend themselves to replayability, you're going to be retreading a lot of familiar territory with each subsequent playthrough, unless of course you grab the expansion pack. Upon starting up Phantom Liberty, you're given the option to skip ahead to the point in the story where Cyberpunk 2077's base game finally opens up. You can roll a new character, Keanu gives you a previously on Cyberpunk 2077 exposition dump, and then you're spat out in Night City at level 15. Theoretically, this is so you can get right into the DLC content, but it's also extremely convenient if you just want to screw around in the open world without yet another introduction to Johnny Silverhand. CD Projekt Red took a similar approach with The Witcher 3's DLC, which undoubtedly contributed to its lasting appeal and how often so many people love to replay it. Maybe they're onto something. What makes games special as a medium is their interactivity, but what that interactivity actually entails varies wildly and can sometimes get in the way of celebrating the classics. There's already the barrier to entry for game preservation and appreciation thanks to hardware requirements and physical scarcity, and there's the ever-divisive issue of difficulty, but the tedium of mandatory tutorials seems like something that could be sidestepped a little bit with some foresight. Tutorials are a necessary evil, and I'm not by any means suggesting they be scrapped entirely because they are super helpful for teaching people how to play games, but there is room for improvement for people who already know how to play games. You can flip past the foreword when you're reading a classic piece of literature, and you can fast forward the opening credits of a classic film you've seen a million times, and you can skip ahead to the best song on a classic album. When the appeal of so many open world games is exploring their intricate microcosms, maybe Elden Ring has the right idea. Take those drawn out, tedious tutorial prologue sections and throw them down a hole so people can just play the game already. Anyway, that's how I feel. How do you feel? Let me know in the comments below. What's your favorite game that has kind of a crappy tutorial? What's the worst tutorial you've had to play through? What's a tutorial that was so bad it made you never play the rest of the game? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Something, IGN.